what would an economic collapse of the United States look like? We can't look to the Depression era for answers. We're living in a different world today. A collapse would probably set off a chain reaction of events from business failures to mass unemployment to looting, rioting, and violent crime. We saw what happened in the New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina. Imagine what would happen if the nation's fuel supply were suddenly disrupted. In 30 days or less, every American city would be out of food and clean water. It would become a nightmare scenario of looting and rampant crime. How likely is that of actually happening? Consider the situation as it stands now. China's stake in the U.S. debt is huge. It is officially the United States' biggest creditor. Right now, America relies on the fact that if China were to cash in its chips, the resulting chaos would bounce back and hit the Chinese just as hard. But if the Chinese suspect that the dollar was going to crash anyway, then all bets are off. The Europeans are in no position to begin purchasing excess U.S. debt. They have plenty of their own problem economies to worry about. The earthquakes and tsunamis have crippled our traditional lender of last resort, Japan. Americans are already beginning to see and feel real inflation. Inflation much higher than the official government numbers indicate. It isn't just fuel prices, although high gas prices are raising the cost of everything from artichokes to xylophones. Food inflation is so bad in some parts of the world that we are seeing massive food riots. Meanwhile, in America, we continue to turn food grains into ethanol fuel. We export our clean burning natural gas, of which we have more than anyone else in the world, and import dirty burning foreign oil. The U.S. housing industry is in free fall. When prices began to drop, buyers decided to wait until real estate prices bottomed out. The problem is, they won't bottom out until people start to buy. The real estate market is flooded, resulting in record low new home construction. Investors have started dumping municipal bonds in record numbers. State and local government debt is at an all-time record high as a percentage of the U.S. GDP. The former mayor of Los Angeles, Richard Riordan, recently predicted that 90% of U.S. cities and states could go bankrupt over the next 5 years. Then there are the multiple threats of war. Even as we're seeking ways to extricate ourselves from Iraq and Afghanistan, we've become embroiled in a conflict with Libya. Last year, the two Koreas came as close to open war as they have in 5 decades. The Middle East is ripe for explosion. U.S. Secretary of State Hillary Clinton recently admitted that the Obama administration vastly miscalculated the so-called Arab Spring.
We're, disturbed by the reports of efforts to crack down on journalists and bloggers and judges and others, which we don't think is in keeping with the direction that the Egyptian people were heading when they started out in Tahrir Square.
Egypt seems certain to become an Islamic republic led by the Muslim Brotherhood. In Syria, Bashar al-Assad is butchering his own people at an alarming rate, while the Obama administration studiously looks the other way. On June 3rd, Assad was polishing the speech he intended to deliver to the parliament, declaring victory over the protesters. In nearby Turkey, the opposition leaders were meeting to strike a deal with the Muslim Brotherhood. Once the Brotherhood came aboard, hundreds of thousands of their loyalists hit the streets in Hama, and the revolution was back on. Assad's forces fired into the crowds, and the Associated Press reported that dozens were killed. Later, armed militants attacked government security forces, and reports suggest that more than 100 policemen and soldiers were killed. unbelievably, it now appears that President Assad will attempt to deflect attention from the revolt by sending Syrian civilians to attack Israel's border with Syria, which they did over the weekend. Some reports say as many as 23 were killed. Of course, the Syrian and Arab media covered the incident at the Israeli border, but no media were allowed into the areas where the Syrian government is brutally crushing the opposition protests. This perfectly illustrates how much of a tinderbox the Middle East remains. Back here at home, most Americans have no idea how horrific the coming crash will be. What we do know is that there is no way the current status quo is sustainable. At some point, system failure is a certainty. So where does this put us on the Bible's timeline? According to the book of Revelation, this will be the order of events. The text speaks of the first 4 seals being broken. This begins the first series of escalating judgments in the 7-year tribulation, which are the focus of the book of Revelation. These seals release the dreaded 4 horsemen to ride upon the earth. With the breaking of the first seal comes the rider on the white horse, symbolizing the ascension of the Antichrist to a position of global power. It's significant to note when the first seal judgment is open, the rider on the white horse carries a bow but no arrows. He conquers in a bloodless, perhaps political conquest. He's not a warlord. He's a religious politician with a solution for the world's collapsed economy. The second seal is then broken, releasing the rider on the red horse. This rider is given power to take peace from the earth. It says, there was given him a great sword, symbolic of what today might be called weapons of mass destruction. The third seal releases the rider on the black horse. After war begins, economic collapse and famine follow. He symbolizes worldwide economic depression. References to a measure of wheat or 3 measures of barley for denarius are symbolic of a day's food for a day's pay, whereas oil and wine are symbolic of great wealth. In the Bible's Great Depression, the poor will suffer catastrophic poverty, but the rich appear to weather the storm in relative comfort. It almost sounds like what we're seeing today. Almost. We've been almost there since the dawn of the 21st century. It has felt like at any moment the trumpet might sound. We're so close that many argue we're already somewhere between the breaking of the first and the third seals. However, let me say this, we cannot be there yet. The tribulation period is but 7 years long. It begins with the unveiling of the Antichrist, which is depicted by the first seal. If the seals were opening, the Antichrist would already be here, and the church, because of 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, would be gone in the rapture. Israel would have to have already signed a covenant with the Antichrist, which guarantees her security. The covenant officially starts God's 7-year time clock, counting down to Christ's second coming. Clearly, Israel has yet to achieve any measure of the Antichrist's peace and security, no matter how false it will be. But we do see the world steadily growing ready for the rider on the white horse to rescue the world from a global economic catastrophe. We're on the brink of global war, but we've been on the brink of global war since September 11, 2001. The global economic situation is unsustainable. We've spent all the money in the world several times over, and we're trying to find a way to spend it one more time. But a global economic catastrophe has been inevitable since the collapse of the Bretton Woods system in 1973. It began to crumble in earnest after the dot-com bubble burst at the close of the 20th century and passed the point of no return 7 years later. But it hasn't collapsed just yet. However, the The key to the Bretton Woods economic system, the good old USA, has now spun itself into an unsustainable debt. And the looming U.S. economic collapse will cause a domino effect on the entire world's economy. And so with this, all four horses of the apocalypse are saddled and ready to burst forth. But as yet, none of the riders have saddled themselves up. But they could have at almost any point since the turn of the century. But still, the Holy Spirit continues his mission as the restrainer. He is all that is keeping the world from total collapse and keeps holding back the floodgates of unbridled evil. I believe it is his gracious restraint that is keeping the dollar afloat, the economy chugging, Al-Qaeda at bay, Iran in its box, America from collapsing, and Europe from eclipsing the U.S. as the premier global power. All this he is doing to give the final offer of grace before the coming judgment of the world. All the necessary conditions for the tribulation are in place. In the past, everyone assumed that if various nations or even the world got into dire financial straits, the United States would bail them out. After all, we were the richest, strongest nation in the history of the world. But today, as evidenced by LEAP's Global Europe Anticipation Bulletin, America is now considered the sick man of the world. And what's more, we're the sick man who won't go to the doctor. Unfortunately, a perception of serious weakness or inconsistency in America's economy can cause the rest of the world to go into uncontrolled panic. And I think that is only a matter of time. You know, some people who write to our website are palpably stressed and shaken by what they hear on this program. Others are excited that what they hear means Christ's coming must be very near. I am concerned and report these unpleasant stories because my mission as a watchman on the wall is to show you and the world that what the Bible predicted will happen is happening. That means that the other things the Bible forewarned, like the rapture, will happen too. You know, I dearly love my country, and I don't want to see her fall. But I know from prophecy that it's inevitable. However, any delay in that collapse allows time for more people to accept Christ's pardon. Your readiness to meet Christ may be indicated by your reaction to the prospect of his soon return. If you're stressed and nervous and dread it, then you should take that as a warning, and you need to spiritually prepare for that day and do it now.